Welcome back to Newsday. Early this year, Ekiti and Enugu states began to push the boundaries of the relevant law regarding the transmission and distribution of power to end users in their areas of jurisdiction. Subsequently, many more states in the Federation began to indicate interest, and it was only a question of time before that conversation assumed center stage. And now the federal government of Nigeria has come up with a policy to transfer regulatory oversight on Nigerian electricity supply to the states. We're now being joined for a quick chat around the exclusive right of states to legislate on the distribution segment of the power value chain by Dr. Fodil, Mohammed-Noah, an energy lawyer. Good to have you here on Newsday. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, let's have your thoughts, on the federal government's plan to transfer electricity regulatory oversight to state governments.
Yes. About a year ago, the federal government, the president assented to Electricity Act of 2023. Immediately after the assent, it became a law to govern the power sector. The perception of the public was that the assent to that bill becoming an act, Electricity Act of 2023, it means that the federal government has not allowed states to participate in the electricity market. However, that was not the case. As far back as 1963, electricity as an item in the Constitution falls within the legislative list as an item. It means that both the federal government as well as the state governments can adequately legislate on it. Although in 1963 Constitution, both federal government and the subnationals can freely legislate. However, in 1979, the power to legislate provided by the Constitution for both the federal government and the state governments were limited. There is an extent to which each party can go. And the same thing applies to 1999 Constitution as amended. That's the position.
And what does this mean for other states going forward?
To start with, the federal government has no role to play, or little or no role to play in the distribution segment of the power value chain. As far as the Constitution is concerned, there are major three segments in the power sector. We have the electricity generation, the transmission system, as well as the distribution system. Those three areas are where the governments of both the federal as well as the state legislate. But as far as the distribution network is concerned, it is the exclusive preserve of the states, not the federal government. So the federal government has no role, has no right to license the states on that because it has been guaranteed by the Constitution. And Section 4 of the Constitution creates that. In item F of the second schedule, part 2 of the Constitution, which talks about concurrent legislative list, that is where we can find electricity as an item to legislate upon. So in that, we have two columns. We have column 1 and column 2 in the schedule of the Constitution, which talks about the role the federal government can play, as well as the role the state governments can play. In that column, federal legislative column, the federal government can generate electricity across the federation from one state to another. Yes. Also, the states can do the same. In the transmission segment, while the federal government can do this, can transmit electricity from one state to another, a state can do the same within its domain. But because of Section 4(5) of the Constitution, which talks about covering the field, the principle of covering the field means that whenever the National Assembly makes law on the same area the state can make, so that of the state will go into abeyance. because there will be a superiority on the role of the federal government. But as far as the distribution network is concerned, the federal government has no role. When we talk about licensing of the discos, it is the exclusive preserve of the state. Only that we have problem as to following our constitution as far as the governance of electricity is concerned.
Well, a few weeks back, the Minister of Power announced a halt to the transfer process, saying the market is not mature, even though he later backtracked and said that they will work with the law. But I'm wondering, could maybe the process should be delayed, or should it be phased, done in a more strategic manner so that the states actually understand the responsibility involved in taking over this regulatory oversight?
First of all, as far as our ground norm is the Constitution, the federal government as well as the state governments are creation of the Constitution. So every part of the federation must follow the Constitution. The role of the minister is only limited to areas allowed by the Constitution. When we talk about licensing, the federal government has no role to license the state. So this is a dispute here, constitutional dispute, that stakeholders must take into account for us to have our way, for us to solve the problem of perennial power crisis in Nigeria. We have to take an urgent step to allow the states to take charge of their own area, exclusive area of the distribution network. They don't need license from the federal government. And they can do so by approaching the Supreme Court under Section 232 of the Constitution to challenge the power of NEC to regulate the distribution network. It is not their own area. They can work as far as we are concerned through generation as they are doing, because they are allowed. They can do the same thing at the transmission level, but they cannot do the same thing at the distribution level. It has to be handed over to the state because the Constitution guarantees it. They don't need any license to operate in that market.
So is that what you recommend, that some of these states should take this to the Supreme Court
level? Exactly.
And also, we do know that there are 3 states who have undergone their own legislation or oversight of their own electricity markets. That's Ondo, Ekiti, and Enugu. Do you know how they have fared, which ways they have gone about it? Is it a successful venture?
I'm aware that many states are doing the same, including Lagos State. It is in the pipeline. But there are challenges. A law is valid, so insofar as it is still in operation. For us to deal with the situation, for the states to have their way, there must be a pronouncement of the Supreme Court on the dispute relating to that distribution network. And you can see that the same thing applies to what happened on the issue of who manages the fund of the states. The Attorney General of the Federation took the bull by the horn to settle a myriad of problems that has been bedeviling the state for over 20 years. And now the Supreme Court has pronounced on it, and that settles the matter. So the same thing can apply to this area. The laws being made now may meet a brick wall if that area is not settled by judiciary. And I'm talking about the Supreme Court in this case, under Section 232 of the Constitution.
Now, considering the high level of corruption and nepotism prevalent in our society, are you not worried, that this transfer of regulatory oversight to states might not be as successful in practice as it seems, now that we're talking about it?
When we talk about rule of law, it covers everything. If we had been governing ourselves with rule of law, we won't have this problem of corruption. It is too big a system. I'm talking about power sector now. It's too big to be centralized. It's not the best. The governance concept relating to electricity regulation all over the world, especially when we talk about federation like ours, because we took inspiration of regulation of electricity from the US. And it was not done that way. States have their own role to play, while the federal government has its own role to play. When we talk about bulk power, federal government can validly play a role there. But when it comes to retailing of electricity that goes to individual states, that relates to consumers, it is the state that will do that. We should not be afraid of what goes before. Corruption is endemic in the power sector. There are many reports on how corruption is the order of the day in the power sector. So I believe that the states are adequately equipped by the law to manage what belongs to them. And that is the position. If it is left to them, they will do better. And we will have what we call decentralized option that the Constitution has created. If we allow the Constitution to work, we will have peace, security, order, and good governance in the various states. They can do it, and I believe, if they are given chance.
And how will all this autonomy affect the amount of electricity that's available to power businesses, homes, etc.?
I can safely mention here, while we have, as at February 7, 2019, the highest peak of electricity generation was 5,375. And till date, we are yet to meet that peak. We are yet. So if we allow the distribution network to be handed over to the state, as it is their role to play, there will be many investments. The problem is not adequacy of investments in the power sector. We have spent a lot, and I believe if we follow the rule of law, half of that can give us, if not uninterrupted power supply, there will be stable electricity going forward.
Now, in the meantime, there are reports that state governments are set to eliminate electricity subsidies in their territories, as they take over regulatory oversight. Isn't this adding more difficulty, on Nigerians that are already overburdened by the harsh economic realities?
Distribution network as well as transmission network are monopolistic in nature. What I mean by saying this is that if each state takes over its own domain of distribution, that is the segment we are talking about, there will be a lot of investment. I'm aware in the Lagos State Ministry of Energy, there are many people who wanted to invest in the generation side of the power value chain. But because the sheer size of the network is too big for one man, for one entity, as a kind of an example, consider the state economy, Lagos State handing over its revenue management to one bank. How would that be? This, having a co-disco as well as Ikeja Disco managing electricity distribution in Lagos State is too big. It can be subdivided. I'm aware that the former Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, advised the electricity distribution network, discos, to sub-franchise. They refused. It's too big for them to manage. Ikeja Disco is the largest electricity distribution network in Nigeria. So they can, if we allow state to take over the distribution network, while the federal government still continue with the transmission line as they have it now, the investment will triple, and what happens as far as electric generation and distribution is concerned is that if we have a lot of participants in that value chain, it will increase and it will be a lot for the consumers. It will reduce the cost of electricity. If we have many people, if we have more energy, it will reduce. Just ordinary principle of supply and demand. If we have more people getting energy, it will reduce the cost of electricity.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for coming in and having this discussion with us here on Newsday. Dr. Fodil Olarinwaju Mohammed-Noah, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.